Hello friends. I hope you all are doing good. So here is an amazing story of what if Naruto risks it all for unholy power. Let's begin. The Kyuubi no Yoko looked at her container with something akin to worry. In the 25 years she had been imprisoned in the blonde idiot, she had grown fond of him. She snorted. Her, the strongest of all demons, fond a weak little bag of flesh? But still, there was something endearing about him. He just had this ability or something that made it hard to hate him, once you truly got to know him. She knew not what it was, but at the moment, she didn't exactly care, either. All she knew was that he was about to die, and she was about to be captured by the remaining Akatsuki members. Oh, how she hated them with a fiery beeping passion. They had imprisoned all of the other tailed beasts. All of her brothers and sisters. If she were free, she would have killed them all after torturing them into insanity. But it was still slightly satisfactory to watch them be killed by people they had underestimated and perceived as weak, like that pink-haired harpy in human form. Gods, she was annoying. It was a wonder that her vessel found her attractive. She pushed those thoughts out of her head as she felt the second stage of the extraction process begin to take effect. Her entire being was being slowly drained out of her container's unconscious body. She paused. Body. Her eyes widened. That was it. The Kyuubi reached out from behind her cage and using a wave of whatever chakra she had left to awaken the blonde whose body she resided in. After a few anxious moments, he arose, blinking adorably as he stared into the massive face of the Kyuubi. Kyuubi? What the hell's going on? Immediately, she got straight to the point. Brat, you're dying. Her comment received the expected response. What the hell do you mean I'm dying? He jumped up and pointed a finger at her in disbelief, exactly like he did when he was barely a teenager. The Akatsuki have captured you, and I am being drained out of your body as we speak. He was about to say something when she cut him off with a glare and a loud growl, achieving the desired effect of him gulping and shutting up. Now, I have a plan. She padded back and forth in her cage, then stopped and looked him straight in his eyes. I will give you what chakra I have left, and in doing so I will essentially be making you the new Kyuubi. Although, this means that you will become the next guardian of this planet. And she meant what she said. Though she was commonly depicted as evil, along with the rest of the tailed beasts, they actually were the demon guardians of the planet. But humans had long since forgotten that. The only reason she had attacked Konoha was because that son of a bitch Uchiha Madara had tricked her with that stupid eye bloodline of his, the Mangekyo Sharingan. And the rest was history after that. As for Naruto, however, after she spoke, his eyes grew wider and wider, until his face resembled an owl's. What? No way. He crossed his arms in an X and scowled to emphasize how much he disagreed. That's crazy talk. That means you'll disappear. The kitsune growled at him again. Do you think I want this either, you idiot? She roared, nearly blasting the human off his feet. Of course I know that. But I have no other choice. If you don't do this, not only will I die, but you will die as well. She was sounding desperate when she yelled the last part. Naruto could only look dumbly at her. But, why? She turned away from him, and hoped against hope that her fur would conceal her blush this time. How embarrassing. I've become fond of you, brat. If anyone deserves to live, it's you. But that means you'll die in my stead. I don't want that to happen to you, he cried, grabbing a hold of 2 bars and pressing his head in between them. Turning to face him again, she willed herself into a human form, one of a beautiful woman with long red hair dressed in an equally red kimono. A distinguishing feature of her pale, flawless face was that she had the same whisker marks that he had. She smiled slightly when she saw the brat gape at her apparent beauty. She pressed a hand against his face and delicately stroked his cheek. Even if I die, Naruto, she started, using his first name indicating how important this was, I will be reincarnated. So don't worry about me. A few tears slid out of her eyes and merged with the water that was constant within her prison. I want you to live. To keep on living. To protect your precious people. But, she pressed a finger against his lips, and whatever he was going to say failed to come out of his mouth. You need to live, Naruto. For my sake. Please. The tears fell out more rapidly now, joined by the ones now emerging from Naruto's own cerulean orbs. The fox could see him visibly stifle a sob as he choked out, Kyuubi-chan. Passionately, she gave him a deep beep, then pulled away. She gently pushed him away from the prison and murmured, "It's time for you to wake up." Naruto stifled another cry, and nodded. Before he left, he gazed upon her sadly, promising, "I'll never forget you, Kyuubi-chan." She smiled at him through her tears as he disappeared. "I hope I will remember you, Naruto-kun." Those words echoed through the prison, even as the greatest of the tailed beasts, the Kyuubi, vanished. Namikaze Uzumaki Naruto bolted awake, coming to a sitting position on the branch he had been napping on. He touched his lips lightly and sighed. Kyuubi. He was distracted when a cry of, "Namikaze, today is the day you die," sounded off in the distance. Naruto sighed and rolled his eyes at the imminent, yet highly insignificant approach of yet another horde of weakling shinobi coming to obliterate Konoha's immortal Hokage. Why was he called that? Simple. He was well over 3,000 years old, nearly 1,000 of which he spent in a time-dilation-sealed chamber of his own design, after taking 50 years just to assemble the extremely large and complex seal array for it. When he'd finally been captured by the remnants of the Akatsuki, namely Uchiha Madara, Hoshigaki Kisame and Zetsu, the Biju extraction process had been interrupted by the timely arrival of his friends, and he'd absorbed the Kyuubi's full power, which in turn made him the new Kyuubi in human form and effectively rendered him immortal and pretty much unkillable. The latter part had been proven when Sasuke had cut off his head, then Naruto had cut his off in exchange, bonds be damned. After all the shit that he'd gone through to return Sasuke to Konoha for Sakura's sake, what does the bastard do? He beeping goes and cuts off his head, with no regrets while doing it. Well, after that, Sasuke could have beeped his ass. If his lips hadn't been ripped off his face. Naruto grimaced at the memory, but pushed it out of mind. He sighed again as the nameless shinobi came at him with the intent to kill, waving their assorted weaponry in an attempt to scare him. Naruto snorted. He'd faced death ever since he was born. Did these idiots really think he was called the immortal Hokage for nothing? Sheesh. It sounded arrogant, sure, but it was the truth, plain and simple. Naruto shook his head and jumped to the ground, snapping his fingers. Immediately, a still masked Kakashi and a much younger-looking Tsunade appeared out of nowhere, both of them dressed in the black cloaks with red inner lining that the Akatsuki were renowned for. However, instead of clouds, there was a large orange spiral on the back of it, ending in the famous symbol of Konoha in the middle, and they also had slightly darker orange inner lining. While Naruto hated the organization with a beeping passion, he had to admit that they had good taste in uniforms, for he too had the same cloak on over himself. The only difference was that his was held closed by an orange sash on his waist, opened all the way to the top, showing his uncovered and taut muscles. His left arm rested in it, as if it was in a sling, and was wrapped all the way to the shoulder in bandages of some sort. "Take care of them for me, would ya?" he intoned, glancing at the incoming wave of ninja. Without a word, they grinned simultaneously and nodded, vanishing before his eyes and reappearing in front of the enemies. A voice came out from behind him, saying, "Talking to yourself again?" Without even turning around, he replied blandly, "You know I didn't want that to happen to them." He nodded his head towards the kunoichi and shinobi that were completely obliterating their opponents, yet not dishing out any mortal wounds. The same voice snorted. A light shuffling sound alerted him that the owner of the voice had shifted their stance. "So where are the other four, then? Out and about scouting somewhere?" Naruto grunted an affirmative, not taking his eyes off the fight. "Yeah, something like that." He didn't even stiffen when he felt a slender pair of arms reach out from behind and embrace him. "Are you sure you aren't straining yourself, Naruto-sama?" After a long moment of silence between, he finally turned his head to come face to face with a vision of beauty. She was almost as tall as his 6'4" stature, the top of her head just barely reaching his nose. Her lovely face was unmarred by any distinctive marks and was framed by long wavy locks of hair colored azure blue, just like her eyes. Instead of normal ears, she had ones that resembled a feline's, situated exactly where a cat's ears would be. Behind her, a long blue furry tail waved idly in a distinctive pattern he recognized that she used when she was anxious or nervous. She was wearing a skimpy short-sleeved blue shirt that just barely covered the bottom of her beeps, showing more than enough cleavage to make a normal man ejaculate blood out of his nose in gushes. Her tight black pants ended just below her knees, and on her feet she wore a pair of comfortable-looking slipper shoes. Around her waist was a loose belt that was connected to a huge weapon that barely resembled a halberd, which was probably as tall as him. Of course, he wasn't taking in her appearance, but rather her eyes. They held a look of sadness in them. Not for him, but for the 6 great ninja that had been slain so many years ago. Yet there they were, or there 2 of them were. Naruto fully swiveled to face her and shook his head. I haven't felt any strain of any sort, not since, he trailed off melancholically, his eyes becoming glazed. The woman, who looked to be in her early 20s, merely hugged him tighter. Naruto-sama, if there is anything I can do. Naruto smiled ruefully at her. Hey, I knew I named you Makoto for a reason. He ruffled her azure hair fondly and brought his attention back to the one-sided battle. He chuckled lightly under his breath when he saw Makoto pout cutely in his peripheral vision. A few minutes later, the last of the assaulting ninja was knocked unconscious. The 2 ninja who won the nearly bloodless slaughter materialized before him again. Then Tsunade spoke. We've completed the mission using non-lethal action. She grinned and pointed a thumb towards the scattered ninja moaning and groaning about in large quantities of pain. Makoto rolled her eyes at the response. Ga, Naruto-sama, don't you ever get tired of talking to yourself? As one, Tsunade, Kakashi, and Naruto himself smirked at the feline woman and said, Nope. Keeps things interesting. The blue-haired woman shuddered. Even after all these years, that still creeps me out, she muttered, her eye twitching in irritation. Kakashi was the one to talk this time. Oh, and here I thought that you'd be used to it already, he mocked in a sing-song tone. Tsunade giggled behind her hand while Naruto laughed aloud. Makoto glared weakly at each of them. Her tail twitched a little bit behind her. I honestly have no idea how you maintain the energy and concentration to maintain it. Hell, your mental processes must be far more advanced than any creature known to man, what with your use of that technique. Naruto's laughter faded, but he still had a grin on his face. Ah, but my dear Makoto-chan, I trained for 700 years in that time chamber, while before that, it took me nearly 200 years just to get used to them being around. Kakashi and Tsunade looked sheepish, causing Makoto to sweat drop. You are the weirdest person I have ever met. It was the blonde immortal's turn to roll his eyes again, but he did so playfully. I was also the first person you ever laid eyes on, idiot. He glanced behind her momentarily, ignoring her cry of mock outrage, and sighed for what seemed like the 1000th time that day. He then addressed the other 2, humans. You 2, continue your patrol. If you can, catch up with either Team 2 or Team 3 and help them out with whatever they need. Yes, sir. Both of them vanished in a swirl of leaves, leaving Naruto and Makoto alone. I sensed a few weak signatures nearby with hostile intent surrounding an even weaker signature, Naruto explained to Makoto, who nodded in understanding. What do you wish of me to do, Naruto-sama? She questioned, shifting right into business mode, her ears perking upwards. He held a hand up. Don't do anything for now. I'll take care of it, but if there's the extremely improbable chance I need help, I want you on standby. Got it? When she nodded, he smiled at her. Okay then, let's go. When they leapt up into the canopy of the forest, Makoto vanished from sight, but Naruto knew she'd be right behind him, so he paid minimal attention to her, locking in on the source of the hostile chakra signatures. He stopped and perched when he reached the cause of his interest. There were 3 thugs surrounding a black-haired little boy, each of them holding steel pipes. His eyes narrowed. If there was one thing he couldn't stand, it was bullies of any kind. He leaned forward on his tree branch to listen in. Heh. What do we got here? Some snot-nosed little punk in our territory, eh? The largest, and admittedly ugliest, one sneered to his partners. He hefted his makeshift weapon threateningly in his palm. The other 2 chuckled maliciously. Yeah, I think we do. What do we do now? The second one mocked in a sing-song kind of voice, using his section of pipe to sharply prod the boy's forehead, causing said boy to cry out in pain. Naruto rolled his eyes. Tuning out the rest of their standard bad guy spiel, he looked intently at the boy. He has potential, Naruto thought to himself. A lot of potential, but I haven't taken on a student in at least 200 years, other than Makoto-chan. There was a moment of silence, in which he realized that the boy was about to get pummeled. What the hell? It'll pass the time at any rate. He jumped down off his perch and landed on one of the thug's head, knocking him out. The other two spun around and glared at him. "Who the beep are you?" they demanded. After getting no response and being blatantly ignored, the leader seethed. "Hey! I demand you tell me who the beep you are, punk ass." To add to effect, he brandished the pipe and waved it in his face. The blonde scoffed. This little brat thought he could make him submit? A snowball had a better chance in hell. Instead, he merely replied with a lazy drawl, "Now why would I tell you that?" This only further incensed the men, which was the common's true intention, and without warning, they attacked the blonde. The child whom they were about to beat closed his eyes in fear, for expected his savior to be killed. Instead, he heard two quick sounds of flesh meeting flesh and then two pain-filled groans. He gingerly opened his eyes and then gaped at the blonde who stood, rubbing his hands against the black cloak he wore. He gulped out of fear as Naruto walked towards him, and closed his eyes again, this time in fear of being rebuked. Instead, he felt a gentle hand pat his head. "You okay, kiddo?" Naruto asked softly, as he knew the trauma of being bullied by those years older than you. The kid sniffed and then grabbed him in a hug before bawling his eyes out. "Hey, shush, it's okay, he soothed, gently whispering in the boy's ear, and rubbing his back in a relaxing motion. "They won't hurt you. I took care of them, so they won't hurt you anymore." Really?" the boy stammered, looking at Naruto with his tear-stained face. At Naruto's nod, he merely lowered his head and hugged the man tighter. Naruto's eyes widened and he glanced down at the boy, who was now suddenly fast asleep in his lap. That hug might have crushed a lesser man's ribs. He thought in amazement. This kid is definitely going to be my student. If his parents let him. He scowled and glared at the thugs. If he has parents, that is. "Makoto," he called out, and instantly she appeared by his side. "I trust that you watched me." She nodded. "Good. Take this child to safe house number 27. Make sure he stays asleep. I'll go and collect the others." Gingerly taking the surprisingly light boy in her arms, she nodded once more without a word and left to journey to the specified location. Grumbling to himself, Naruto found another clearing and sat down in the middle of it. Patiently, he waited for a few minutes before 6 other figures came upon his clearing. 2 of them were familiar, Tsunade and Kakashi. But the other 4 had their faces obscured by differing masks, and black material from the masks extended over their heads until it fully enveloped, leaving no sign to be recognizable. They, too, wore the same black and orange cloaks that the 2 blondes and the silver-haired nin wore. So, started off Kakashi after a rather awkward silence. In the background, you could just faintly see Tumbleweed gently rolling by. Tsunade quirked an eyebrow and crossed her arms. "We're here to discuss the current Hokage's request, Baka." One of the masked people, the one with the tiger mask, snorted. "You're only calling yourself that, Su-chan," she said teasingly, though her voice was clearly distorted through the mask. At will, she removed her mask to reveal a different-looking Mitarashi Anko. Her face was the same, but her eyes were bright yellow, with actual pupils, and her hair was let loose in a simplistic style and seemed longer. She smirked deviously at the odd group. "After all, we are all the same person." Naruto coughed into his hand, catching his other self's attention. He grinned at Anko, who waved cheerily at him, and said, "Okay, that's enough out of me for now. Time to get down to business." He frowned and stood up, tapping a finger against his cheek in thought. Now, the Hokage said that tensions with several other villages were rising to the point of war breaking out. Peace talks between them calmed things down, but shit's bound to hit the fan. Most likely in a few months or so, since that last war a couple of years ago pretty much destroyed most of each of the village's forces. So that means that the few months we speculate will be put to use reconstructing their homes and such and rebuilding their military force, Kakashi concluded, leaning against a tree. Tsunade frowned. "So what does the Hokage want with me then?" She wilted a little under the looks she received. Yes, I meant," the blonde added sheepishly. Anko rolled her eyes and balanced back and forth on the balls of her feet energetically. "Hey. The brat's worried about Konoha, so more than likely, she wants us to come back to the village to provide some extra security." The man with the lion mask people spoke in a flat voice. "It would also prove beneficial if we came back, as it would bring morale to the current forces." Anko smirked at the man and poked his mask. You know, you shouldn't keep your pretty face hidden like that, Lion-kun. Her smirk widened when her male counterpart became embarrassed, even though they shared the same mind. Alright, Kakashi called loudly, ignoring their little discussion, so what do we want to do? Another masked person, one who was obviously a woman from the large bulge at her chest area, stated, I think we should return to Konoha. Besides, it's just about time to check on Naruto's clan. Seeing as how the attention was turned back on him, Naruto sighed once again. Yeah, so we'll go to Konoha. But what to do about the boy I picked up? He shows a lot of potential. Tsunade immediately agreed with it. We should do it. After all, we haven't taken in a student in a long time since Makoto-chan, like you thought before. After a moment, everyone seconded her decision. So it's settled then. After we get him up and awake, I'll spend a month with him before going to Konoha. Everybody else nodded. The last masked person, who was another woman, had stayed silent throughout the whole conversation, but added her 2 cents in. What should we do in the meantime? Naruto paused for a second. Go out and spy on the other villages. He got up and turned to leave, but stopped to add, we'll rendezvous in Konoha in a month. All of them vanished without a trace. When he arrived at the safe house, with no sign of Makoto anywhere, although she was probably out getting more supplies, Naruto came to one conclusion. Now that he looked the boy over, he definitely had pure potential. His chakra coils were surprisingly well developed, even though they hadn't been used yet. As for his chakra itself, well, all Naruto could say was that it was high jonin, possibly bordering cage level. The boy himself didn't look like much at first glance. He was roughly 6 or 7 years old, with scruffy black hair that went to his shoulders. He was maybe 4.5 feet tall, as opposed to his own 6-foot stature, and looked to be growing quite well. There were minor signs of malnourishment too, but at least his ribs weren't showing. He had slight muscles, more than likely trying to defend himself against any attackers, or running from them at any rate. But other than that, he was perfect. Naruto slapped himself lightly. Oh man, I think I'm channeling Orochimaru. Not good, he groaned. He shook his head in disdain at the thought of that foul monstrosity, but quieted down once the boy showed signs of waking. He blinked blearily, showing small beady black eyes that were filled with life. He looked around for a moment to take in his surroundings before his little eyes settled on Naruto, who was sitting backwards on a chair facing him. Naruto smiled. Ah, good to see my guest is awake. He left the chair to go sit on the edge of the bed the child was resting on. So how ya feelin', kiddo? The boy smiled back shyly and replied with a soft, I feel okay, thanks to you. The immortal blonde nodded. Hey, that's good. So, you hungry? I got some food, if you want some. He pointed a thumb over to a table where a few plates filled with food had been set up. The boy shook his head rapidly, not wanting to impose on his savior. And no, it's all right. His stomach betrayed him as it rumbled loudly, causing its owner to blush in shame. Naruto chuckled and ruffled the kid's hair, causing his blush to deepen. Oh ho? I'd say you're pretty hungry. Come on. There's plenty for both of us. He gently lifted the boy and carried him over to the table, where he set him down and moved to his own spot. Both of them dug in and shared a comfortable silence as they devoured the meal. Hey, kid, what's your name, anyway? I don't want to be calling you kiddo all the time now, Naruto said as he set the pile of plates in the sink. The boy thought it over for a second before answering shyly. Yamamoto Shigekuni. Genryu Sai. He mumbled, turning his head away to hide his blush. Yamamoto Shigekuni Genryu Sai. Naruto rolled the name on his tongue for a few seconds before grinning. Well, then, Genryu Sai-kun. I'm Uzumaki Namikaze Naruto. Nice to meet ya. He cheerfully stuck his hand out in greeting. Genryu Sai stared at the offending limb before reaching out and giving a feeble shake and quickly retracting his hand again. Naruto gave him an amused look. It's not like I'm gonna bite you, Genryu Sai-kun. He startled, and gave the blonde a sorrowful look. Sorry, I'm sorry, Naruto-sama. The immortal lifted an eyebrow and frowned. Naruto-sama, he questioned. Genryu Sai nodded swiftly. Why you saved me, Naruto-sama. Naruto rolled his eyes and sighed. It seemed that he'd have to break the kid of his shyness. Well, whatever. He mumbled before perking up again. Say, where are your parents anyway? shouldn't they have been with you? He knew he shouldn't have asked that as soon as he saw Genryusai's eyes water up. They're dead. As soon as Naruto gathered him up in his arms, the boy let loose a torrent of tears. No words needed to be said as the young boy slowly fell asleep in his arms again. The next morning, after they had awoken, or rather, Genryusai had, because Naruto rarely ever needed sleep, and eaten breakfast, Naruto inquired, "Do you have anywhere to go, Genryusai-kun?" The boy shook his head roughly, staying silent. However, he was looking at Naruto with an imperfect puppy dog look that looked cute regardless. Naruto was the first person who had showed him any kindness, and he was really hoping that the man would let him stay with him. Naruto chuckled and ruffled the kid's hair, making him blush at the affection. "Well, I guess you could stay with me, oof." He was interrupted by Genryusai tackling him in a big hug. Once again, he was crying, but Naruto knew that it was of happiness. The man laughed, and gently pushed him away. "So I'll take that as a yes, then, huh?" Genryusai nodded fervently, and Naruto had to stop his head manually. Can you show me how to be cool like you?" he exclaimed childishly, after thinking about how easily his savior had taken down those bad men. "Sure thing, kiddo. In fact, you could even become a ninja." When he said Genryusai's eyes widen, he could have sworn he was looking at an owl. Really, his eyes become sparkly, causing Naruto to sweat drop. "Yup. Actually, in about a month, I'm heading to the biggest ninja village, Konoha. You can enter their ninja academy there." His statement caused the boy, in a total 180 from his previous shyness, to jump up and shout, "Yay! I'm gonna be a cool ninja like Naruto-sama." Naruto's sweat drop returned with a vengeance. What the hell is with this kid? He shook his head and thought for a minute, ignoring his dancing charge. Wait a second. He threw a sideways glance at the boy and a sly smile grew on his face. "Hey, Genryusai-kun," he called slyly, who froze and stood with rapt attention. "I have something special to show you." Grabbing the boy and quickly dashing a note for Makoto to find, he disappeared with him in a plume of fire. Meanwhile, in 6 parts of the shinobi nations, 6 people smirked as they received a mental notice. Exactly a month later, 2 figures could be seen walking lucidly towards the gate. One of them was unmistakable, even for the newest generation of shinobi. Namikaze Naruto calmly strode forward, still wearing the Akatsuki-like cloak from before with his arms still loose in it in a sling-like fashion. A Konoha headband shone proudly from his forehead, slightly taming his unruly, spiky blonde hair. By his side was an unknown man. He looked to be about 21 years of age. His black hair was long and strung in a simple ponytail. He wore a simple sleeveless shirt and pants underneath another Akatsuki-like cloak, but this one was opened and pushed back by the man's arms which were jammed in his pants pockets. His face was mature and handsome, and his eyes were like 2 small beads of onyx. "So, this is Konoha, Naruto-sama?" the man questioned, tilting his head towards the gate. Naruto groaned irritably. "I thought I told you to stop calling me that." The man smirked. "Only if you stop calling me Genryusai, Naruto-sama." Genryusai, or Yamamoto as he now preferred to be called, watched amusedly as his mentor pouted like a child. "Besides, I seem to recall that you'd take me to Konoha in a month, not 14 years. The immortal waved his hand tiredly. Technically, it was only a month. The time dilation deal makes the difference a little sketchy, and even though I constructed the damn thing, it always gives me a random time conversion, so don't blame me." Yamamoto rolled his eyes. "Whatever. So when are your associates going to meet us?" He had previously been informed of Naruto's little ability during his time under the seal, but he hadn't seen them up close before. He stared up into the clouds and mumbled, "In 3, 2, 1. On cue, 7 figures darted out from behind them. While Naruto paid them no mind, continuing leisurely towards the village of his birth, Yamamoto wasn't familiar with any of them and grabbed a concealed sword that he pointed to him. "Whoa, easy there, kiddo," a purple-haired woman dressed in the same cloak as Naruto said in a familiar tone. She had her hands up in mock surrender, but a wide smirk made it clear she had no intention of surrendering anyway. Wearily, the black-haired man slid his kunai back its pouch. "So I take it you are Naruto-sama's other bodies then?" Enko shrugged, meeting Tsunade's eyes for a moment. "Yeah, something like that," they said in tandem. Makoto interrupted them. Hey, don't confuse me with them, she exclaimed, waving her arms comically, causing the huge weapon on her back to jiggle, as well as her large assets. I'm just following Naruto-sama too. Naruto broke in, then, barking out, if you want to waste time, then do so in the village. He was standing some feet away from them, tapping his foot impatiently. Coming. Both Makoto and Anko shouted. They stared at each other and grinned, and then raced towards the gates. Tsunade and Kakashi chuckled and followed them, with the remaining three figures seeming to sigh behind their masks before following as well. Yamamoto found it very strange that his sensei's other bodies acted like separate people, Makoto apparently excluded, but decided not to comment on it, instead making his way towards Naruto. After they signed in at the gates, they made their way to the Hokage Tower located in the center of the village. Namikaze Fumiko, the current family head of the Namikaze clan other than the infamous Namikaze Naruto himself, was enjoying a nice, stress relief session with her fiancé Takeshi. He was so gentle with her, she cooed into his ear as she felt him hit one of her pleasure spots with his tongue. Oh, it felt so good. Ooh, yes, right there. Ooh, he paused in his ministrations to passionately beep her, which she returned eagerly, then resumed teasing her nipple with his tongue. Yeah, that feels so good. Unfortunately for them, they never noticed the impatient knocking on the door. Takeshi grinned mentally as he heard her moan in pleasure. He was about to continue downward to her nether regions when the door suddenly was knocked off its hinges. Both of them jumped up, and startled would be an understatement for them. They were pretty much completely embarrassed that they'd been caught having beep, and in her office no less. Together, they both turned to face the intruder, only to meet eye to eye with Namikaze Naruto himself. He had a rather peculiar expression on his face as he made eye contact with them. Whoops. After seeing her ancestor in the flesh, Fumiko blushed a dark shade of crimson. Then she growled angrily and clenched her fists. Naruto baka. She bitch slapped him so hard, he literally flew out the window. Takeshi winced, but decided not to voice his concern, instead mumbling, Fumiko-chan, perhaps we should get dressed. As Fumiko realized what she'd done, she blushed even darker than she did before. That would be a good idea. Both of them scrambled for their clothes, and hastily donned them. As soon as he was finished, Takeshi beeped her one last time before jumping out the window. Naruto appeared as soon as she was finished dressing herself. Hey, never took you for a pervert, Fumiko-chan, he stated with a sly grin. She whirled around, startled once again before realizing who it was. Naruto Jii, why'd you have to go and do that? She whined, stomping her feet and scowling heavily. The man in question merely shrugged. I'm sorry, I didn't know you two were going at it. Fumiko huffed and crossed her arms under her beeps. You could have knocked, you know. Naruto rolled his eyes. I did knock, for about 27 minutes. Oh. Fumiko scratched the back of her head in embarrassment. She narrowed her eyes and pointed a finger at him. But that didn't mean you had to go and bust down my door, damn it. Hey, just be glad I don't have Makoto with me right now, Naruto retorted. This immediately pacified the woman, who shivered at the thought. Anyway, I'm here for that meeting. Why the hell did you tell me to wait a whole month in the first place? Fumiko's eyebrow twitched. Who gave you the mission scroll? Her ancestor shrugged. Some black-haired kid with glasses. She scowled. So that's why you came only now. That son of a, shaking her head, she sighed and slouched down into her chair. Whatever. The point is, we need you. All of you. Not to mention Makoto-san as well, Naruto Jii. Not only will it help with the defense of the village, but with you here, morale will rise for sure, which is something we desperately need with our ninja nowadays. Naruto chuckled, causing Fumiko to glare sharply at him. It's not funny, Naruto Jii. This is a serious situation. I doubt that all of you can take them out. Oh, and why's that? He asked curiously. There are reports coming in that one of the enemy villages created a jutsu especially for use against you. They haven't determined what it is, but it's got the Grand Alliance all excited. None of our agents can even get close to uncovering it. Here, she paused to pour herself some water and took a sip. Every single one of them so far has been rooted out and killed, so we had to halt that investigation. But we still receive intel that it's some pretty serious firepower for use against the immortal Hokage. She leaned forward a bit. I'm not saying that you're weak, far from it, but just watch out for it when the time comes. She received light laughter in reply. Nah, it's most likely nothing, Fumiko-chan, but I'll keep an eye out, K. He waved a hand dismissively. If I die, then I'll die. I've lived far more than my fair share of time anyway. Fumiko remained silent, but her eyes glared at him. Fine. Do what you like. That's what you always do. Naruto frowned. Hey, don't be like that. I understand that you're afraid that I'll die, but death comes to everybody at some point. He tilted his head. Well, for almost anybody, he added nonchalantly. He reached over the desk and placed his hands on her shoulders and smiled. Somehow, his descendants had retained most of his family traits, even after all those years, much to his amusement. I've been around for a long time, Fumiko, he stated seriously. I've seen things no person should ever see. Nobody can understand me, least of all you. So I'm not afraid to die. Hell, I don't know if I can die at all. But if I do kick the bucket, then you have to be strong. Be strong for this village. Be strong for yourself. Whenever I see any of my family die, one of you guys, it hurts me too. But I remain strong because they looked up to me as their grandfather, he trailed off in reminiscence. That gives me the strength to keep their memories alive, you know? There was another tense and awkward silence. When she started to sniffle, he smiled softly and positioned his body to hug her. You know what I see whenever I look at you? He felt her shake her head as she leaning into his chest. I see a little blonde 4-year-old girl running towards me, waving a scroll in the air, demanding that I teach her. You're so much like me sometimes. I actually think it's in the genes. His chest shook as she half-sobbed half-giggled into it. And you're still Baka Jii, she mumbled. Naruto smirked and shifted his head upwards. That I am. Approximately an hour later, he was ignoring the bows and low murmurs of his return to Konoha, in favor of finding out where the hell Makoto, Yamamoto, and half of his other bodies went. He'd been too emotional in that moment with Fumiko, that his control slipped ever so slightly, and he hadn't paid attention to them through the mind link. Most of the time, he had full control over each individual body. If certain events occurred, however, such as a slight slip in control, then some of his control in the more unruly bodies would become semi-isolated from the collective, so to speak. Unfortunately, the only way to re-establish the mental link was to knock them out and enter a meditative state. Regardless, they were still the same person all right, but each body contained an alternate personality, of sorts. For some odd reason, the personalities tended to be nearly identical to the original soul of the body. Anko, for example, acted exactly like her original soul did 3,000 years ago, lustful, playful, bloodthirsty, etc. There was a complex process that went into the technique, though the execution was rather simple, but he used it to its maximum potential with the only complaint early on being that it was his close friends and family whose bodies were used. He figured that it was partially the previous Kyuubi's fault before she disappeared, but he didn't blame her, they'd already been dead. What he hadn't known, though, and still didn't know, was that when he became the new Kyuubi no Yoko, he essentially absorbed Tsunade, Kakashi, Anko, and the other three's souls by expanding his soul's own energy as a net, and unconsciously using his very body as an anchor for said net. In doing so, he effectively merged them with his own soul, unknowingly using his chakra to keep them from disappearing. It was a little cruel, but to be fair, he still didn't know about it. He would, very soon, he just didn't know it. The only thing he wouldn't do was stoop to Nagato, or rather, Pain's level. It would be stupid to do so. But the Union, as he'd come to call himself, and the six paths were so different and yet so similar it was sort of scary. Right now, though, going back to his current predicament, the only thing that he could think of was. He slapped his forehead in exasperation. Oh shit, don't tell me. One of his still masked bodies, a female with a bird mask, sighed from behind him. I'm afraid so, Bird said with a slight chuckle. Naruto hung his head. Beep. That's the last thing we need right now. He groaned at the thought of those three. Beep, he repeated. Let's go before they cause any property damage. When he finally found the three unmasked ones, they were piss-faced drunk and singing a lewd song on top of the bar's counter. Nearby, Yamamoto tried to hide his face while Makoto sang along, her flushed face giving away her intoxication. Naruto and Bird could only stare in horrified shock as another beat started up and the trio started to sing again. I bang on the door but you won't let me in, 'cause you're sick and tired of me reeking of gin. Locked all the doors from the front to the back, and left me a note telling me I should pack. Anko and Tsunade punctuated the last line by yelling, "Get out," at Kakashi and giggling. I walk in the bar and the fellas all cheer, they order me up a whiskey and beer. This line was, in fact, also punctuated by all the patrons doing a mini cheer and clinking together their drinks. You ask me why I'm writing this poem, some call it a tavern but I call it home. Beep you, I'm drunk beep you, I'm drunk pour my beer down the sink I've got more in the trunk. Beep you, I'm drunk beep you, I'm drunk and I'm going to be drunk till the next time I'm drunk. You've given me an option, you say I must choose, tween you and the liquor, then I'll take the booze. Jumpin' on Western down to the south side, where I'll sit down and exercise my ninja pride. By now, the whole bar was singing along, horribly off key. Beep you, I'm drunk beep you, I'm drunk pour my beer down the sink I've got more in the trunk. Beep you, I'm drunk beep you, I'm drunk and I'm going to be drunk till the next time I'm drunk. Tsunade drawled out, drunk, before stepping forward and falling off the counter in an undignified heap. Bird's sweat dropped heavily at the scene while the blonde man face-faulted. Hey, get off that stage, he shouted angrily after recovering. He jumped in front of them and dragged them out of the bar, yelling a quick, sorry, to the bartender. Makoto staggered after him, giggling like a fangirl, and still clutching a rather large bottle with another unopened one grasped by her tail. The patrons booed him for a second before happily returning to their beer, ignorant of the beatdown occurring right outside their safe little haven. Yamamoto peeked out from between his fingers a minute later, and blinked in confusion. Huh? Where'd everybody go? He heard punching from outside, and walked cautiously to the front door of the bar. He moved it slightly open, just in case, only for Kakashi to slam into his head. After pushing the unconscious man away with some difficulty, he managed out, hey, what the? Only for both Tsunade and Anko to slam into him as well. Naruto chuckled sheepishly. Sorry, he smirked at his pupil, wiping his unbandaged hand on his cloak. Bird stood beside him, with Makoto slumped over her shoulder. By the way her shoulder was shaking, he could tell she was laughing silently at his predicament. Yamamoto responded with a groan of pain. Anko had a rather hard head that hit another head that was rather hard at the moment, but not in a good way. I don't think he'll have children anytime soon, he croaked out, grasping his damaged package. What, seriously? Naruto asked dubiously, a painful nod. Shit, I didn't think her head was that hard, he shrugged. Well, whatever. When you're feeling better, meet me at the Namikaze estate. Without so much as a second glance, he picked up the unconscious bodies and vanished, Bird following him a second later. Crocodile tears poured down Yamamoto's cheeks as he continued to nurse his jewels. You're so cruel, Naruto-sama. Yet another hour passed by as he finally recovered enough strength to walk cowboy-style to Naruto's home. When Anko, who had recovered along with the others sans Makoto, saw him, she ever so eloquently inquired, the beep happened to you? Yamamoto growled at her, why did she have to be the only one home? You should know, you're all one person anyway. He then flipped her off and ambled over to the fridge to retrieve a large amount of ice to numb the pain further. Anko rolled her eyes. Yeah, I know, but you don't understand the link we have, dumbass. Then please, explain it to me, he exclaimed in a high voice, as a result of applying a bag of ice to his nuts. Damn it. Where are my other bodies when you need him? She mumbled before sighing. Okay, it's like this kid. We may be one person, but each body possesses a unique aspect of the original, Naruto's, personality. Since we are split between bodies, there are circumstances where the mental link we share with each other personality can become semi-isolated, like before. When we're linked, we know what we're doing simultaneously, I mean that we know what each of our other selves are doing in real time. Our core personality is the same, though each of us has different traits that the others don't. Hence, that's why we prefer to talk to each other out loud, despite the fact that we have the same mind. And because of that, our mental processes are extremely fast. You can liken it to about 100, or even 1,000, times faster than a normal human being. But since we're technically not human anyway, that doesn't apply to me, or us actually. Yamamoto nodded slowly, knowing the meaning of the non-human comment. Okay, I can see that now. But what happens when you become semi-isolated, or whatever? Anko shrugged and leaned back. Exactly that. Under certain circumstances, the link between us and the main body, Naruto, can malfunction, but it's not exactly that, either. She paused, trying to come up with a comparison before continuing. Think of it like an almost severed rope. Most of it is cut off, but it's still held together by a single thread. That's what happens with us, although our link can never be fully severed. Like, that last thread for us would be a steel chain instead of straw or nylon or whatever. That's the fail-safe that this technique has built into it. And the reason why I don't remember what happened to you is because whenever we become semi-isolated, memories from our other selves take a while to kick in. Oh, so are you connected now? Anko smirked. Yup. So technically, even though you're talking to me, you're also talking to Naruto, Tsunade, Kakashi and those dorks who like to keep their masks on. Ah. Yamamoto fumbled with his ice pack for a second. That makes much more sense now, thanks, Anko-san. They shared an amicable silence for all of a second before Anko was smacked hard on the back of her head. Who the hell are you calling a dork? Ow. Anko clutched at her head and moaned pitifully. That hurt, you know. Behind her mask, Yamamoto could almost picture Bird rolling her eyes. No shit. Like you just explained to Yamamoto-kun here, I'm you and you're me. Bird pulled off her mask in a swift move, revealing bright locks of long, pink hair and emerald eyes. Anyway, it's a pleasure to meet you, Yamamoto-kun. Although, I've sort of met you before. I'm Haruno Sakura. She smiled brightly. Or, at least, that's the name I go by. Like Anko Baka said before, I'm actually part of Naruto-kun. Anko stuck her tongue out in reply to her statement. Yamamoto blinked. It's nice to meet you too, he muttered, keeping one hand on the ice while the other rubbed the nape of his neck. I'm sorry. This is kind of confusing to me. Sakura waved a hand dismissively while Anko pouted in the background. Don't worry about it. You should have seen us when we first were like this. That was confusing. She giggled at the memory. Anko chortled and added her own 2 cents. Yeah. You're a guy all your life. Then imagine waking up in 7 bodies simultaneously, 4 of which are girls. That was a shock. The black-haired man recoiled slightly. Wait. You're parts of Naruto-sama, but that means that you're really men. He paled in horror at the thought. Both of the girls rolled their eyes at him. Wow, you're being stupid. We're pretty much, but not quite, alternate personalities, which means that we are part of Naruto, not that we're actually Naruto himself, they said in tandem, freaking him out. I'm Sakura and she's Anko, but even though we're the same person, we're not each other, she explained, confusing him even more. Whoa, wait, what? He looked from woman to woman, a frown marring his face. But you just said. Sakura sighed. We're all part of a whole, Yamamoto-kun. That is what we mean by we're the same person. But parts aren't always the same, you see. You shouldn't be so quick to judge, Yamamoto-san, a new voice interrupted from behind them. They turned to see Kakashi and the lion-masked man walk into the room. The silver-haired man had been the one to speak, and he continued on, saying, we're like a puzzle. All part of one whole picture, but none of the pieces are the same size or shape. Despite that, we all fit snugly together to make that picture. Anko yawned lazily and flicked a thumb at Kakashi, who settled down in an adjacent chair. What he said. Lion merely nodded his head at her, indicating agreement. Okay. Yamamoto slumped down into his chair. I think I get it now. You'll get used to it. Looking up, he saw that the man of the hour himself had shown up. Naruto smiled crookedly at him. I still find it weird sometimes, after all these years. Right, guys? Yamamoto glanced around and saw everybody grinning sheepishly at him, except Lion who still donned his mask, and Kakashi who still donned his half-mask. Though he deployed his classic eye smile, of course. Those smiles vanished as Naruto cleared his throat. There's something important we have to tell you, Yamamoto. Once again, somebody interrupted the conversation, this time the person being the current Hokage, Fumiko. Naruto Jii, she cried, trying to catch her breath. It. Naruto grabbed her and guided her to the couch. What is it? What's wrong? He asked worriedly. Fumiko shook her head rapidly. They changed it to tomorrow. They're coming tomorrow. I just got the word. All of them stiffened except Yamamoto. What's going on? He frowned and furrowed his brow. Shit, Tsunade commented, coming in at that time followed by a sober Makoto and the last unmasked woman. That changes a lot of things. Fumiko scowled at her. I know that, damn it. She downed a glass of water Naruto procured for her and resumed scowling, deep in thought. Kakashi scratched his throat idly. We need to have every available ninja be battle-ready by morning then. Not an easy task. Anko snorted and crossed her legs. Ya think? She smirked and added, that just means I have more of a challenge setting up my traps, though. She pointed at Sakura. You're helping me, too, Pinky. Fine, you're my teammate anyway, Sakura retorted. What I want to know is why they stepped it up to tomorrow. She looked to Fumiko for an answer. Fumiko shook her head again, this time in disdain. When they heard that Naruto Jii was coming back to the village, apparently they increased preparations tenfold. She frowned. I guess they want to take out the immortal Hokage, or try to. Like they did the last war. Well, then, Naruto began, but Yamamoto cut him off. Please, tell me, what the hell's going on? He yelled irritably, not liking being left in the dark. He shrank back a little when they all stared at him, but he wanted in on whatever was going on. Naruto sighed and answered his question. The Grand Alliance is going to invade Konoha tomorrow. He was shocked. What, tomorrow? If the Grand Alliance was coming here, then some heavy shit was going to go down. How the hell are they gonna get here? Fumiko answered this time with a dispassionate shrug. Summons, vehicles, whatever, I don't care. The point is that we're going to be invaded tomorrow. Yamamoto bit back a curse. But why the hell are you all acting so casual about it? Makoro, who'd been silent for the whole conversation, quietly stated, this isn't the first time Konoha has been invaded. He stared at her, then at each of them for a split second. Determination grew in his eyes and with steely resolve, he asked, so what can I do to help? That was met with slightly different reactions. Naruto chuckled and ruffled his hair. Sakura giggled at him while Makoto and Fumiko looked at him dubiously. The two masked people remained silent in a corner of the room, merely observing him. Anko and Tsunade, on the other hand, smirked devilishly at him, and Kakashi flashed him an eye smile. For tomorrow, you're sticking with me, kid, he said heartily, his eye glinting mischievously. Yamamoto shivered. Yamamoto was right to be afraid, in a way. Wave upon wave of enemy shinobi had come up to the gates of Konoha around noon the next day, although about a fifth of their forces had soon been killed by the various traps Team 2, aka Anko and Sakura, had set up the previous night. He looked around dispassionately from his place atop the Hokage Tower as fights occurred all around him. Everywhere, he saw kunai or swords clash in showers of sparks. In the distance, huge summoning creatures duked it out, creating miniature earthquakes that could still be felt for miles. Kakashi, though, had left him to his own device once he felt Naruto call him. Using a sensor technique, he could feel his mentor and father figure fighting several powerful people. Despite the fact that he knew Naruto had been around for many years, he couldn't help but feel a twinge of worry course its way through his body. But he ignored it and turned his attention back to the city-wide brawl at hand, searching for areas to help out. Seemingly unknown to him, a figure stealthily snuck up from behind, an assassin's kodachi poised to strike down upon him. But then Yamamoto turned around and kicked his would-be killer's face in particularly hard, crushing his skull and all but smashing his brains into goo. He was probably only a speed specialist, which meant that he wasn't strong, which also meant that he was killed very easily. He sighed and kicked his leg again, effectively throwing the blood off of the limb. He shook his head and jumped down off the tower, spotting a group of chunin getting their asses handed to them on a silver platter. Well, off to battle then, he mumbled to himself. As he arrived to the scene, he decided to hang back a second and assess the situation. 4 Konoha shinobi lay in pools of their own blood, still very much alive, much to Yamamoto's morbid surprise. The remaining 3 standing were wounded as well, but not as much as the ones on the ground. Their opponents, 6 ninja from Kumo and 2 from Iwa, barely had a scratch on them. Just give up, you weaklings, one of them sneered, pointing his sword at the outmatched group. Yamamoto rolled his eyes at such a cliché line. They started fighting again with vigor. When a Konoha Chunin was about to get his head lopped off, Yamamoto decided to intervene then, blocking the sword with his own concealed blade. It was small and durable, just under 4 feet, and was hidden on his back, underneath his cloak. The black-haired man smirked at the Kumo Nin and coated his blade with chakra, pushing forward with extra pressure, cracking his opponent's blade in half. Luckily for Yamamoto, the other half of the sword embedded itself into the neck of another enemy nin, making one less foe for him to deal with. He cracked his neck and thrust his sword forward. "Come on," that beeped, "surely ninja of your caliber can do much better," he taunted, knowing that it would enrage the idiots, bringing all of their attention to him. He eyed the Konoha nin, who looked at him and nodded, picking up their wounded and escaping. The 2 Iwa nin moved to follow them, but Yamamoto appeared in front of them, blocking their way. "And where do you think you're going?" He drawled. The Kumo nins joined them and surrounded Yamamoto. "And what the hell are you going to do about it, punk-ass motherbeeper?" A nameless shinobi laughed at him disbelievingly. Said person had his head removed from his body mid-laugh. "That's what," Yamamoto retorted smugly, his blade sparkling crimson now. That enticed the rest of them to attack him head-on. He dodged a punch to his ribs and launched a haymaker of his own to his attacker's face, temporarily knocking him out of the fight. The rest of them met the same fate, either dead or alive, until the last one stood her ground. She swung her sword at him, but he ducked and slashed at her knees. She flipped forward, avoiding the strike, and brought her sword downwards, aiming for his neck. Yamamoto quickly brought his weapon and parried, but she recovered and stabbed at his side. He brought his arm up, and the sword met the limb, but didn't cut him. He smirked and pulled his sleeves up, revealing long dark orange bracers that extended to his elbows. Her eyes narrowed, and she dashed forwards, her blade dragging against the ground. Yamamoto merely continued to smirk as she brought her sword up, and with it, a shower of sharp rocks, the effect of a Doden jutsu. He grunted then grinned as the rock needles hit him, exploding in a cloud of smoke. "A Kage Bunshin," she exclaimed, glancing all around her. "That's a lost technique. How the beep do you know that?" The kunoichi felt something cold against her neck. "My teacher is Namikaze Naruto," he muttered in her ear, reluctantly enjoying the way her eyes widened, and quickly slit her throat. Yamamoto sighed and flicked his blade. "Geez, some people." His own eyes widened as he felt a powerful chakra signature flare. "Naruto-sama," he cried, and bounded off, hoping to reach his teacher in time. Makoto sighed in a tired manner, yawning afterwards. Her ears were drooped, and her tail was waving lazily behind her. She was leaning on her huge halberd, which was plunged into the dirt. Her opponent's eye twitched. "Are you gonna take this seriously or what, bitch?" she growled. The catgirl pouted at her. "If you must insult me, at least call me by my own species." She paused for a second, tilting her head. "Actually, I'm not even a cat. I still have no clue why my body looks like this in this form," she mumbled to herself. A vein popped out of the Kusa Kunoichi's forehead. "Shut up and die, Konoha scum." She pulled her arm back and ran towards the azure-haired woman with the intent to kill the annoying bitch, chakra forming around her hand. Makoto yawned again and simply grabbed the handle of her halberd, using it to flip herself up. The fist harmlessly impacted the weapon, barely causing a vibration in the stout weapon. Silence settled upon the duo. The catgirl was desperately trying to keep her eyes from drooping while the Kusa nin's eye twitched again. She retracted her fist and cradled it, tears flowing from her eyes. "What the hell is that thing made of?" she exclaimed incredulously. "That thing should have crumpled from the strength of her punch, damn it." Makoto shrugged. "I have no idea. Naruto-sama made it for me, so only he knows what it's made of," she answered truthfully. Naruto had created it especially for her, after he saw how proficient she was in handling large weapons like that when she had used a fallen enemy's halberd in battle long ago. She'd been using it since she was 14, and it was still in perfect condition. That was saying a lot, considering she was nearly 1500 years old. "Naruto-sama, the kunoichi sneered, interrupting her thoughts. "He sounds like a fool, sending people like you into serious battles." Makoto's blue eyes flashed golden for a brief second, causing her foe to step backwards from her killing intent. "Nobody insults Naruto-sama." With a war cry, she lifted her massive halberd with practiced ease. Before the other woman could even blink, she was cut in half. Both parts fell to the ground convulsing. How's that for serious, bitch? She coldly mocked the corpse, swinging her weapon and latching it onto its holster again. A flare of chakra caught her attention, and she frowned. Speak of the devil, she murmured. Without further delay, she vanished in a swirl of wind. On top of the Hokage's faces, fierce battle took place. The current Raikage and Tsuchikage were fighting against Naruto and Fumiko. Seemingly unnoticed by the combatants, Naruto's other bodies formed a circular perimeter, creating a dome-like structure out of pure red chakra. That was the scene Makoto and Yamamoto arrived at. What the hell happened? Yamamoto questioned Tsunade, who was closest to the duo, while he sheathed his blade. The blonde glanced at them for a second before returning her concentration to the upkeep of her portion of the barrier. Their techniques were getting more destructive, so Naruto flared his chakra to scare off any weak stragglers around this area. A strong blast of wind and a shower of rocks that impacted the red barrier emphasized that statement. Like that, she said, unfazed by the show of destructive power. Ah, Makoto voiced, quickly fixing her frazzled hair. They noticed Naruto eyeing them and nodded their heads. He nodded in return and turned back to the fight. He then made his infamous sign, and 10 cage bunshin came into existence, splitting into 2 groups and distracting the opponent cages. Meanwhile, he formed chakra in both hands and dashed for the Raikage. Forcing the 2 orbs to meet, he cried out, Odama Rasengan. The Raikage barely had time to jump away as the area he had just vacated was incinerated. Phew. That one almost hit me, he chuckled, albeit nervously, dusting himself off. Inside though, he was wondering if he had bitten off more than he could chew. If that jutsu had hit him, he would have been surely disintegrated. He knew of the legendary Rasengan and its variants of the immortal Hokage and the Union, but he'd never seen it in action. However, his comment made Naruto narrow his eyes and smirk. It wasn't meant to hit you. The Raikage was confused and afraid, and he voiced it with a simple, huh? Around the cage, kunai with special seals on them activated, creating a pentagonal beam of light around him. Oh shit, he mumbled. Naruto appeared in front of him, and he couldn't lift a finger to do anything. Rasengan. A blue light flashed, and the cage had a gaping hole in his chest. With his last breath, he said smugly, all according to the plan. The blonde immortal raised an eyebrow. What was that? The Tsuchikage stopped in his fight with Fumiko to go through a long series of hand seals. He pushed his hand to the ground, calling out words that were highly distorted and unintelligible. From behind him, a huge gate rose up out of the ground. This is the end for you, Namikaze. He screamed maniacally, plunging a kunai into his own heart. As he dropped to the ground dead in apparent sacrifice, the gate opened, and ghostly hands came out of it. Nobody could move, because the gate itself seemed to be expelling an enormous amount of killing intent, much more so than even the original Kyuubi no Yoko could. With everybody temporarily paralyzed, the ghostly hands had no problems dragging everybody within a 30-foot radius into their point of origin, namely the massive Gothic gate. Naruto closed his eyes as the doors closed behind the group. Around him, Yamamoto, Makoto, Fumiko, and his other bodies fainted from the intense chakra-rich atmosphere. Shit. To be continued, and thank you for watching.